Imagine a cliff edge. Now imagine an entire economy driving off it. In February 2025, we didn't just see a dip in statistics, we witnessed a staggering, unprecedented 40% freefall in Canadian visitors crossing into the United States compared to the same time just a year prior. This wasn't a slow leak or a typical seasonal slump. It was a collapse, a full 40% evaporation of traffic in a single month, and the forecast looks even darker. A sobering poll conducted by Abacus Data this past March reveals that 62% of Canadians have effectively sworn off traveling to the U.S. for at least the next 12 months. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive analysis into global economics and geopolitics, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss a breaking update. When you look at those numbers, don't just see percentages on a screen. See the reality, a devastating $4 billion annual crater blown into the American economy. We are talking about vacant hotel rooms, restaurants with dark windows, and entire border towns watching their lifeblood drain away because their neighbors to the north have decided they would rather spend their vacation days literally anywhere else on Earth. This is the inevitable fallout when you brand your single largest trading partner as an enemy. It is the direct, tangible consequence of Donald Trump slapping 25% tariffs on Canadian products, openly threatening to annex a sovereign nation as the 51st state, and spending months hurling public insults at Canadian leadership. But here is where the story shifts from a trade dispute to a historic pivot. Sources deep within the planning circles in Ottawa confirm that the Canadian government is done merely reacting. They aren't just firing back with retaliatory tariffs anymore. They are currently drafting comprehensive, detailed contingency frameworks to walk away from the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement entirely. Consider the players involved. Mark Carney, the very same strategist who successfully locked in Canada's admission to Europe's massive $244 billion safe defense program, is at the helm. Working alongside a prime minister who has quietly outflanked Trump by broadening Canada's strategic alliances, Carney is constructing a new economic architecture explicitly engineered to sever Canada's reliance on the American market. And let's be honest, he isn't doing this in the shadows. Under Carney's guidance, Canada is aggressively tearing down internal trade barriers and fast-tracking new partnerships overseas. The signal being sent to Washington is unmistakable. If the United States wants a trade war, Canada is fully equipped to fight it elsewhere. The clock is ticking louder than anyone realizes. The Canada-US-Mexico agreement, known as CUSMA north of the border and USMCA to the south, faces a mandatory review date on July 1, 2026. We are talking about a deadline that is less than 6 months away. Under the strict terms of this deal, all three nations must formally declare their intent, renegotiate, renew, or withdraw. While the paper expiration date isn't until 2036, this upcoming review creates a critical opening for any party to fundamentally rewrite the rules or blow up the deal completely. Remember, Trump championed this agreement during his first term. He paraded it around as a crowning achievement of his presidency. Yet today he is single-handedly dismantling it through his own antagonism. To truly grasp the magnitude of Trump's miscalculation, you have to look away from Washington and look at the ground level in American border communities. Take Haines, Alaska, for example. This is a town that relies on the road through Canada's Yukon Territory just to connect to the rest of the world. The mayor there has issued urgent public warnings that Trump's tariff policies are shattering the traditionally warm bond between Americans and Canadians. These aren't complex economic models. These are real-world towns watching their local economies disintegrate because the Canadians who used to pop over for dinner, shopping, and holidays simply aren't showing up anymore. And the situation is deteriorating. On April 11, 2025, the Trump administration rolled out a draconian new mandate. Any Canadian citizen staying in the U.S. for more than 30 days must now register with authorities and submit to fingerprinting. Pause for a second and think about the message that sends. You are taking the citizens of your closest ally, your biggest trading partner, your literal next-door neighbor, and treating them like potential threats that need to be tracked, tagged, and cataloged in a database. The result? Predictable and swift. Canadian business professionals who used to commute across the border multiple times a month for meetings are now scrambling for workarounds. Canadian families who spent their weekends exploring American cities are booking flights to Europe instead. The financial bleeding is already quantifiable, and it is speeding up. American tourism boards are sounding the alarm that this loss of Canadian traffic isn't a temporary blip, it looks permanent. Once a traveler establishes a new routine, once they realize they prefer the cafe culture of Europe or the beauty of their own domestic backyard, they rarely return to the old ways. Industry experts estimate this shift in Canadian travel habits could slash up to $4 billion from the U.S. GDP every single year. That is a loss greater than the entire economic output of some smaller U.S. states. But the true genius of Canada's countermove is strategic, not just reactionary. While Trump was busy antagonizing his northern neighbor with tariff hikes and annexation rhetoric, Mark Carney was in Brussels, putting ink to paper on Canada's entry into the European Union's Safe Defense Program. While Trump was demanding fingerprints from Canadian visitors, Carney was forging trade bonds with European allies who actually treat Canada as an equal peer. And while Trump was publicly musing about absorbing Canada as a 51st state, Carney was quietly proving that Canada has viable alternatives that do not require bowing to an erratic neighbor. According to insiders familiar with Canada's economic roadmap, this pivot away from U.S. markets is not a bluff or a threat. It is a reality that is already in motion. The CUSMA review this coming July is simply the moment when Trump will be forced to confront the price tag of treating friends like enemies. Before we dive deeper into Canada's new global strategy, if you're finding this breakdown valuable, please take a moment to share this video with a friend or colleague who needs to understand what's happening to the economy. Now let's unpack what Canada is actually building to replace its dependence on the U.S., because this goes far beyond temporary defensive tactics. We are witnessing a wholesale restructuring of Canada's strategic and economic DNA, and it is unfolding at a velocity that Washington seems to completely miss. Start with the European angle. Securing a spot in the Safe Defense Program wasn't merely about selling military hardware. It was a calculated move to cement Canada's status as a trusted inner circle partner of the European Union at the precise moment Europe is losing faith in American reliability. Diplomatic sources close to the negotiations report that Canada and the EU are hitting the accelerator on expanded trade cooperation that transcends defense, spanning energy alliances, critical mineral supply chains, and deep collaboration in the tech sector. These aren't just polite diplomatic wishes, these are active, intense negotiations with draft frameworks already being passed across the table. Then look at the Asia-Pacific playbook. While Trump has been threatening virtually everyone with tariffs, Canada has been quietly fortifying its ties with Japan, South Korea, and other key Pacific nations. Canadian trade officials, speaking on background, have made the goal explicitly clear. Build a network of multiple robust markets so that no single nation, including the United States, can ever again use economic pressure as a weapon against Canada. Diversification has graduated from being a smart policy to a survival imperative. Here is the aspect that should send a shiver down the spine of every American business owner. Canada isn't just shopping for new customers, they are shopping for new suppliers. For generations, Canadian firms purchased American goods because it was easy, geographic proximity, long-standing relationships, and the tariff-free zone established by NAFTA and USMCA. But when the U.S. demonstrates it is willing to slap 25% tariffs on goods despite a signed treaty, and when an American president threatens national sovereignty, Canadian procurement managers start re-evaluating that risk. Suddenly, European suppliers look much more stable. Asian manufacturers offer competitive prices without the drama and political volatility. A May 2025 analysis by Oxford Economics suggested that Canada had begun to roll back retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods after certain exemptions were granted. However, Canada's finance minister, François-Philippe Champagne, immediately shot that down as a falsehood, clarifying that 70% of those retaliatory tariffs remained firmly in place. That is not the behavior of a nation looking to smooth things over. That is the behavior of a country that has decided it can afford to stand its ground because it is no longer held hostage by the American market. They are correct in that assessment. While Trump was tweeting threats, Carney was engineering options, and those options are set to become permanent realities on July 1st if the U.S. trajectory doesn't change. Perhaps the most damning proof that Trump has lost his grip on the narrative came in early December 2025. The U.S. Trade Representative hosted mandatory hearings in Washington regarding the renewal of CUSMA, These weren't intimate chats. These were 3 exhausting days of testimony from nearly 150 heavyweight American business leaders, industry associations, and trade experts. The consensus was overwhelming. Almost every single voice begged the Trump administration not to torch this trade agreement. Riley Bushu, the vice president of the Northwest Horticultural Council, representing the massive apple, pear, and cherry industries worth $13 billion, took the stand to recount how retaliatory tariffs from Mexico during Trump's first trade war had already battered his sector's exports. He then delivered a stark, chilling warning. With thousands of American family orchards already teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, losing preferential access to the Canadian and Mexican markets would be catastrophic. His exact words were haunting. There are no other export market opportunities capable of offsetting the severe economic losses if we lose preferential access to Mexico and Canada. Let that sink in. A titan of American agriculture is effectively telling the government that Trump's trade war is not a negotiating headache. It is an existential threat. And he was far from alone. Dave Walton, secretary of the American Soybean Association, warned that Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto parts were painting a target on the backs of U.S. soybean farmers, exposing them to inevitable retaliation. The American Automotive Policy Council, speaking for giants like GM, Ford, and Stellantis, argued that vehicles and parts that already meet the tariff-free standards of CUSMA must be exempt from Trump's new levies because that was the very deal Trump himself signed. And here's the kicker. During these very same hearings, when Trump was asked point-blank about the future of CUSMA, his response was cavalier. He stated that the United States would either let the agreement expire or work out some different arrangement with Canada and Mexico. Let it expire. The trade pact he spent his first term agonizing over, the deal he touted as a historic victory, he is now casually suggesting he might just let die on the vine. Sources privy to the administration's internal debates reveal significant anxiety among Trump's own economic advisors. They fear he does not fully grasp the catastrophic ripple effects of CUSMA collapsing. In 2024, these 3 nations conducted over $1.6 trillion in trade under this banner. Approximately 50% of that activity involves supply chains where parts and components weave back and forth across borders multiple times before a product is finished. A single car part might cross the border 3 or 4 times before it ends up in a driveway. Under Trump's new tariff regime, every single crossing triggers another 25% tax. The math is brutal and undeniable. If CUSMA is allowed to expire or if these tariffs persist, American manufacturers will simply cease to be competitive. Canadian and Mexican companies will pivot to other partners, and the United States will be locked out of $1.6 trillion in trade that sustains countless American jobs. All of this destruction simply because Trump decided that treating allies like adversaries was good politics. So, what is the endgame on July 1st, 2026? The honest truth is that it depends entirely on whether Trump wakes up to what he is about to forfeit. Right now, the evidence suggests he remains asleep at the wheel. If he stays on this path, threatening tariffs, hinting at annexation, and treating Canada like a hostile state rather than a brother in arms, then Mark Carney will walk into that CUSMA review meeting holding cards that Trump does not have. Canada has already secured its place in Europe's $244 billion Safe Defense Program. They are fast-tracking trade alliances across the Asia-Pacific region. They have proven they can weather American economic pressure because they are no longer solely tethered to the U.S. consumer. Carney can credibly threaten to walk away from the table because he has spent the last year meticulously building the exit ramp. And what does Trump hold? He has a coalition of panicked American CEOs begging him to stop. He has agricultural sectors screaming about existential ruin. He has auto manufacturers calculating a $12,000 price hike on every car. He has border towns watching their economies crumble as Canadian tourism evaporates. And he has a trade agreement he personally negotiated, which he called a historic triumph, now on life support because of his own decisions. The political fallout for the United States extends far beyond the balance sheet. When your closest friend decides you are too unstable to trust, when they begin constructing alliances specifically designed to insulate themselves from your decisions, that is not just a failure of trade policy. That is a fundamental seismic realignment of global relationships. And once that tectonic shift occurs, it doesn't just slide back into place because an election brings a new administration. Canada's strategy of diversification will outlive Trump's presidency. The European partnerships Carney is forging will endure regardless of who sits in the Oval Office. The trade relationships with Asia will only deepen with time. And the hard lesson that other nations are learning, that the United States under Trump cannot be trusted to honor its signature or treat its allies with basic dignity. That lesson becomes a permanent scar. July 1st, 2026 is less than 6 months away. Trump has exactly that much time to decide if he wants to salvage the trade deal he spent his first term building, or if he would prefer to watch Canada walk out the door, taking $1.6 trillion in annual trade and decades of brotherhood with them. Based on every action he has taken so far, he is choosing the latter. If you found this analysis insightful, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below with your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the global economy.